Today's show is sponsored by Cloud Zero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, Cloud Zero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, Cloud Zero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, Cloud Zero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh. And for the week of September 13th, we are going to jump right in. We've got some interesting news this week. Our first item, as many know that have listened to the show, we love data and we love surveys and we love digging into these, and especially these ones that really give us a good idea of the developer landscape and trends over the years as well. And so there is the developer-led landscape, the 2021 edition. And if you aren't familiar with this, you really need to go check this out. Information on 1,004 companies, which is really represents a little over 1,200, almost 1,300, if I remember correctly, different product lines. And you can dig into the data and dig into that data by category, by segment, by the amount of ARR they're generating, how much growth they have, funding. And it's just really, really cool to be able to, from a developer's point of view, look at all this data, look at categories, look at products, and get an idea of what is out there and who the players are on the market and see how things have grown and changed between 2020 and 2021 as well. So if this is of any interest to you, definitely go check this out. Fantastic research and fantastic data points there. For our second article for News of the Week, the one I actually made me scratch my head just a little bit, but then it kind of made perfect sense once I dug into it a little bit. Intuit went and bought MailChimp, and for not a small amount, for $12 billion. And at first I was like, okay, why do the Quicken people need MailChimp? But when you think about it, what is Intuit's one big thing? It's QuickBooks and small and medium-sized businesses managing those finances. Well, what is MailChimp? MailChimp is CRM, customer relationship management software, especially around outgoing communications for that exact same consumer market. And what I also found really interesting, I did not know this, MailChimp has been around actually in one way, shape, or form since 2001 and was actually privately funded as well. So they never took venture capital funding. They didn't go through all the typical rounds. They've kind of organically grown the business over the years. And so this is quite a windfall for the co-founders. I certainly hope they don't go all Wolf of Wall Street with all the billions they're going to be getting here. Certainly wish everyone the best of luck with that going forward. And finally, for our third article, we wanted to talk about Oracle and Oracle Cloud. We have mentioned Oracle Cloud in Cloud News a number of times and also had folks on the show in the past as well. And so we always want to follow what is going on there. We know they've been doing very large investments in the cloud infrastructure side of the business because you just have to be able to keep up these days. But what they did announce as part of their earnings, the results weren't quite what everyone expected. Revenue did increase in a marginal amount year over year in the same quarter. but they also announced very, very significant infrastructure investments again. So they are moving in the right direction without a doubt, and really interesting to see where they go. And we certainly wish the Oracle folks the best of luck going forward. And with that, that's going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Right after the break, we're going to be talking about remote management, especially for Kubernetes environments, with the folks over at Teleport. Right after the break.
Today's show is sponsored by Spot from NetApp, the cloud automation platform that makes it easy to deliver continuously optimized infrastructure at the lowest possible cost. Spot helps customers get the most out of their cloud investments by automating cloud infrastructure to ensure performance, reduce complexity, and optimize cost. Their machine learning and automation scale to exactly meet application needs using the most efficient mix of instances and pricing models, eliminating the risks of over-provisioning and cloud waste. Best of all, their software works with leading cloud platforms, services, and tools so that you can simplify and automate your cloud infrastructure wherever your workloads and applications run and however you run them. Discover how leading companies, from cloud-native startups to global enterprises, are automating, simplifying, and optimizing their cloud infrastructure with Spot by NetApp. Check them out at spot.io/cloudcast, where you can find more information, quest a demo, or even start a free trial. That's spot.io/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud monitoring platform built by engineers for engineers, enabling full-stack observability for modern applications. Datadog integrates seamlessly to gather metrics and events from more than 450 technologies, including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Easily identify slow-running queries, error rate bottlenecks, and move fast with built-in dashboards, algorithmic alerts, and end-to-end request tracing and log management. Datadog helps engineering teams troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place to enhance performance and prevent downtime. Start a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Just visit datadog.com/cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, as you know, if you've listened to the show for any period of time, there's a couple of things that we always love to do. First and foremost, anytime there's sort of trends happening in our industry, especially trends that are affecting a lot of us, we want to go off and find subjects, experts that are going to help us, kind of navigate our way through it. But then we love the opportunity to talk to new companies that are introducing new technology. That's always been something that we've loved to do because we learn a lot, but you've told us over and over again that you love learning about new technologies, finding out about innovative new companies. And today I think we hit both of those things, kind of the intersection of the two of those things. So really excited to talk today with Ev Konsovoy, who is co-founder and CEO of Teleport. Ev, welcome to the show. Great to have you on today.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to dive into Teleport, the company, the technology you guys provide. Before we get there, tell us a little bit about your background. You've got a very interesting entrepreneurial background, even prior to Teleport, and then what sort of drove you to found the company and get started?
Well, sure. I'm an engineer by training, and actually, I should probably say I have a degree in mathematics, and that's because I grew up in what used to be called Soviet Union. And in Soviet Union, they have this joke that you become a computer scientist after you fail at becoming a real scientist. And that's basically what happened to me, and this is why I'm here. So right after graduating, I moved to Texas, and I worked at a company called National Instruments, building measuring tools for other engineers. And it was awesome. Just having engineers as your customers is, I just love it. Simply because the world around us is built by engineers. So if you have a product that is used by them, they teach you how everything works. You learn about how helicopters fly. You learn about how cell phones communicate. You learn about how fracking works, because I think, remember, it was Texas. So
sure.
You get exposed to that actually fascinating technology. After working at NI for a few years, I decided to see if I want to do something else. So I quit and started exploring. And I quickly realized that the rest of the software world is not as attractive to me. I do want to have engineers as a customer. And frankly, just couldn't find a comparable job, and that's how I became an entrepreneur. I needed to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the job offer to join Microsoft because they had the development. I don't remember the name of the team. Like it's like they make Visual Studio, CLR, then .NET CLR, or do something else. And something else is what I've decided to start doing. So that's how I've gotten into entrepreneurship.
That story, that origin story, is fascinating because we're always always very, very interested in finding out what was the origin of the thing that motivates you, and you having that realization that engineers as your customers, or engineers as the people who are going to give you the problems to go solve, was kind of connected with you, connected with your soul, connected with the thing that you most resonated with. So that's it's always good to find that thing that connects you to something, like you said, in the market, that then helps you be able to build a business.
Look, frankly, it makes it more interesting when you can visualize yourself being a user of your own product. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But also, it's a cheating in a way, right? So people will always point the finger at like famous entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs. Like Steve Jobs could figure out what everyone really wanted without even talking to anyone, right? So, well, supposedly that's what we all think. I'm definitely not like that. I prefer to build products basically for myself. So I'm an engineer. Other people are engineers. So it feels very natural.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about Teleport, and I want you to sort of introduce the company and what the focus of the company is. But I mentioned in the opening that we're kind of hitting the intersection of two things. One is we always love to talk to interesting new companies, interesting technology, but we also have this other intersection where everybody's working remote. Our access to our compute resources, where our compute resources are, is so much more distributed than it even was 2 years ago. That's a problem space. Help us connect the dots between that problem space of access and what Teleport, is focused on and tries to help engineers solve.
Sure. So Teleport is an access plane company. So the product that we built, we're calling it an access plane. And what it does, it helps engineers or empowers engineers to securely connect to any computing resource anywhere on the planet. And the computing resource could be anything. It could be a server like SSH server, or a Windows server, or it could be a Kubernetes cluster, or a Postgres database, or a MongoDB database, or internal web dashboard application. So whatever it is that engineers use, that's what Teleport gives you access to. But maybe it would help if I just explain what does it mean to have access,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Because even before the pandemic, the cloud computing happens in the cloud. Right? It happens in a data center. But engineers, we're not physically in a data center, so technically, pandemic shouldn't make any difference. Like we always interact with everything that sits in a data center remotely using remote access. So to step back, what is access? I would argue that access, like for simplicity, like you have to have like a framework how you think about things. Access is 4 things. First of all, you need to have a physical connectivity. You should be able to have an ability to send encrypted packets from client to a resource that you accessing. Makes sense, right?
Yep.
The second one is authentication. Authentication means that the resource will need to be accessible by you only if you are who you claim you are, and you are on a list of approved people, right? So if you don't work at this company, you should not have access to that resource. Makes sense, right? Authentication, that's the login screen.
Right.
The third component of access is authorization. So let's say you authenticated, so you're allowed to have access. But what can you do? Is it read-only access, or are you allowed to change data, delete data, right? So that's authorization. And finally, the fourth component is audit. Like everything you're doing, do you keep track across your entire organization? Like what is happening? Like all of the changes that are happening to all these different computing resources. Do you know who's done it, when, why, and who's responsible? So that's the audit or visibility or observability. That's the fourth component. So now, if you look at what we're actually dealing with in a data center, you will realize that there's just a lot of different technologies that go into every computing environment. You have a bare metal hardware like the actual servers. Then there has Then you have an API to create VMs, right? Then you have virtual machines. Then you have containers. Then you have Kubernetes to orchestrate containers. Then you have like storage volumes and then databases. Then you have some web UI to manage databases. So all of these things, they're all resources. And every single one of them listens on a network socket, has its own configuration, has its own login, has its own permission system, right? So has its own audit. In other words, every single one of those resources needs to have connectivity, authentication, authorization, and audit figured out. And historically, companies actually would employ people, engineers, who know how to configure each resource type to have proper remote access. Well, first of all, it's a lot of work, right? Because the number of these resources is exploding because cloud is growing, cloud computing is growing. But secondly, it's prone to human error. If you have so many different things that you need to configure, then eventually you'll forget something or make a mistake. So, and that's why Teleport was born. So we realized that all of these endpoints that need remote access, there are just so many of them with so much complexity that access needs to be consolidated. Teleport, the access plane technology that we're promoting, allows you in a single place to solve your connectivity, authentication, authorization, and audit for everything you have. That's the fundamental kind of simple idea of what Teleport does and why it's great. Yeah. So you get like the side effect of that is amazing experience, right? Because it's much like you don't want to be logging into 50 different things 50 times per day. So Teleport kind of combines amazing engineers' user experience with security and compliance benefits.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I in a past life, many years ago, I used to have to do a little of both of those things. I was one of those engineers that had to remotely log into all sorts of machines, and then we also had to set up what we used to call RAS, or remote access server. So we had physically a whole bunch of boxes that were really nothing more than just modified routers with all sorts of cables that plugged into the console ports of lots of different devices. And yeah, the maintaining those things and then knowing, physically which port you were sort of connecting to remotely, maintaining radius systems and all sorts of authentication systems was a nightmare. And if you got it right, it was wonderful. And like you said, if you got it wrong, you either locked people out of getting into things, or you potentially opened up all sorts of security holes and stuff. So I'm excited to sort of learn how the next generation of this has evolved, because I know from having lived through it maybe more than a decade or so ago, it wasn't a whole lot of fun. So how has it evolved? What are sort of the big leaps that the technology has taken to make this simpler, to make it a better experience?
It's a great question, because it allows me to not simply talk about us, but also about other companies and technologies in this space, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So there's been other innovations and other companies that they've made Teleport more possible. Let's put it this way. So first of all, there's been this transition in the industry in the last, let's say, 10 years or so towards identity-based access. So let me explain to you the difference between identity-based access and the kind of legacy access. Legacy access often relies on shared credentials. So you probably heard the story that you would create a user, and let's call that user like admin, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And an admin is not a specific person. It's just an alias. So you have this user admin, and admin has credentials. It could be a password, which is obviously horrible. It could be a public-private key pair, which is slightly less horrible, but still horrible nevertheless. And then you would store these credentials in some kind of encrypted vault, some kind of storage for secrets. And then if someone needs to have access, they would need to go and borrow those credentials, and then they would go and use that resource. But they will be seen as admin, right? So they're hiding behind that alias. Right. So then if you go into audit log, you will see a bunch of records that admin created this file, or admin ran this deployment, or admin did that, or this, or whatever. But who that admin is, you have no idea. It could actually be a hacker who stole those credentials. So identity-based access moves away from shared credentials. And identity-based access says you should have a single source of truth, a database of all of your employees, all of your engineers. And that database obviously is rich with metadata. You have first name, last name, email address of a person, the title, the group or groups that person is member of, right? So, and these things are called identity platforms. Okta is probably the most famous, but you also have Active Directory. You could use GitHub or Google Apps as your source of truth. Who are the people who should or should not have access, right? And then when you authenticate, you go through single sign-on. You have to first go authenticate into GitHub, for example, or Google Apps. So then from there, your identity information is pulled, and then it's encoded into a certificate. And then when you're interacting with a resource, all of this is now part of the certificate and resource. And that resource, let's say it's a MongoDB database or an SSH server, they could make decisions on what you allowed or not allowed based on your identity. So it's always you, not some kind of alias. And also the audit log is now enriched. So you actually have a list of it's Ev Consovoy or Brian Gracely is doing those actions as opposed to some kind of admin. So we didn't invent any of that. So all of this kind of gradually started to evolve in the industry. And first it was used to access web applications. Like the identity-based access probably started in the consumer space, right? So you log in with Facebook, log in with Google. And what we are doing, we are bringing this to the data center. So we're bringing this capability. Some people say that we put identity on the wire. So we allow you to authenticate with Google Docs or Google Apps or Okta or Active Directory or GitHub, whatever it is you want. And then that identity gets pulled down and enforced for SSH, for RDP, for Kubernetes, for MongoDB. So we have a long list of resources we support. So now you have this identity-based access implemented everywhere. So that's one big thing that I would say enabled us to do what we do. And the second component, this is where we're innovating a little bit, although it's not really that big of a deal, is how do you consolidate access? How do you make sure that we can give you a certificate that works for everything? Well, of course we can't, because a certificate-based access to Kubernetes and certificate-based access to, let's say, SSH are incompatible. Those are different formats for certificates, right. X509 versus SSH, right? So that's the kind of one powerful capability that Teleport brings, is that Teleport, when you log in with Teleport, it issues certificates for all of these protocols, but they are completely synchronized. In other words, TTL, time to live, or your identity in these certificates for Kubernetes and for SSH, they're going to be identical. So when your access to Kubernetes expires, your access to SSH expires. If you have elevated permissions for Kubernetes, it means you have same elevated permissions for SSH. So which allows you to have a single place, or we call it access plane, right? Where you could configure your permission system across your entire stack. So if you're an intern and you have very limited permissions, in Teleport, those limited permissions will be enforced everywhere across your entire environment. Actually, all of your environments globally.
Yeah, no, that's I'm sort of listening and I'm smiling because I'm thinking about this, and you just sort of start walking through these checkboxes of things that used to be problematic for us. It was like you said, that admin account, that sort of super those alias accounts that were fine until you had a problem, and then you were like, who did this? What time of day was it? All that sort of stuff. So the granularity is fantastic. You can authenticate, you can validate who the people are, but that whole concept of you're giving people permission such that they don't have to think about all these systems as different, but you're managing the differences, the complexities behind the scene. And then you've got this great granularity to be able to say, oh, well, that person left. That person was terminated. That person has been moved into a different job and doesn't need those credentials. It seems like you've made those sort of negative actions even simpler as well, not just the ones that give permission, but the ones that take permission away or change permission. It feels like you've made those far simpler too.
Not even simpler. I would even say automatic. So for example, if you quit, right, and your record in Okta disappears, if there are any active connections from your laptop, Teleport will just kill them. So it's a real-time automatic kind of enforcement of your global permission system. But you also mentioned something interesting I want to talk about is the kind of new trends in the industry, like what we're all collectively moving towards or what are we running away from. So one thing that we are starting to move away from, which makes me really excited, is moving away from privileged accounts. Like we all know what root is. Like, oh, I have root, like on this box. But then if you forget about individual boxes and you look into Amazon account, like there is also root, right? Like it's possible to have a user who can do whatever they want on your entire production environment. And that's not a good idea. Why? Because it increases the attack surface area. So if you think in terms of like, what is my surface area that the attacker can go and probe, trying to break into my system? And like you could argue that the more infrastructure you have, the surface area grows simply because you have more endpoints, right? That's the simple concept to understand. So then the more people in your organization you have, that's also like your attack area is growing because their laptops could be compromised. Attackers could hack into their laptops, and from there they can launch attack onto your infrastructure. But another dimension to attack surface area is time. Let's just say you have access simply because your title says you should have access. Are you using that access right now? Most likely no, right? Like there are 24 hours in a day.
Right.
And if the company policy says that you should have access, usually it means that if you wanted to, you could have access that any hour of those 24, which makes you more vulnerable, right? Because remember, your laptop can be attacked. So if you move away from that and you say, actually, by default, no one has access to anything. And if you want to go and log in, let's say, into a Kubernetes cluster, that's like, so you log in and your privileges, they need to be escalated just for the duration of that session. And that's what it's not just Teleport that's doing it, it's the general industry that's moving. And then Teleport, the way it works, like, yeah, sure, you go and you log in with multi-factor, you receive your certificates. And then if you try to access a really important resource, like production, database, whatever, Teleport will say, give me a reason why you need it. And you could say the reason is like a ticket, like a Jira ticket or GitHub ticket, like you're working on a bug, you're troubleshooting. So you specify the intent for that access and the time duration. Like you say, I want it for an hour. And then that request goes into something like Slack or PagerDuty. So your team members, so maybe your boss, they will have to review and approve you getting that access, but just for 1 hour. It's kind of similar to pull request if you think about it. So which means that access is now tied to a specific intent, to a specific action. So in addition to having your identity associated with that access event, you also have to provide a reason. In this case, it's a Jira ticket. And then once you're done fixing that problem or troubleshooting, gathering data, the access is automatically revoked. So now you're shrinking the surface area, not just in terms of kind of infrastructure and peopleware footprint, but also you're shrinking it in time just for 1 hour. Yeah. That's a kind of new development that is happening, and we encourage everyone to adopt this access request system to implement access, especially to production environments.
No, I like that concept because it doesn't remove the need to say, hey, we have an audit trail that certain access was permitted, but it also lives in the reality that there's just times when we need access. We've got a reason for doing it, and you sort of break down that sort of castle and moat thing where you have to go up to the highest power and say, hey, can I please have this thing? You build it into the way that people work. Like you said, you integrate it with PagerDuty or with Slack or with whatever, where you've got people actively listening. There's mechanisms to do chat ops and other stuff, and I like that sort of way of saying, hey, let's put this in the reality of how people work, not just the reality of like what an org chart looks like.
Well, if you ask people how they work, they will probably tell you that I actually don't want to be approving access requests all day long.
Sure.
Because if you do that, making this programmable, this opens quite interesting opportunities. For example, people might be requesting access to do certain things, and you could actually build your own robot that enforces certain policy. So the access request could be approved programmatically. So you see, now you are getting into this territory where you could claim that we're now adopting infrastructure as code movement, right? Because we're moving to the cloud. Only you know which resources are most critical or least critical. And all of that knowledge is changing all the time because infrastructure is dynamic, right? So your production database could be moving around. So by incorporating all of this logic into your application, you could basically have an application that governs access to itself, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that is very, very cool. I had on my list of things I wanted to dive into. You sort of really dig into how Teleport works. I think we've touched on some of it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up and get some things off the website that I'll put in show notes, because as a visual medium, sometimes it's hard to really dive into all the nuances of how it works. But
it's actually really simple.
Oh, yeah, fire away.
Oh, Teleport basically consists of two things. I'm simplifying. You have a proxy. And a Teleport proxy speaks all protocols that it supports. So it's a multi-protocol proxy. And that proxy is identity aware, which means that if you don't have your certificate on the wire, it will send you to SSO, single sign-on. And then once you get back, then you get access. So that's the first component.
Okay.
And the second component is what we call the authentication service. That's the certificate authority. That's the thing that issues all of your certificates and also collects the audit log from all of the resources. So this allows you to have unified, again, connectivity, authentication, authorization, and audit simply by having those two components.
Nice. Keep it simple. No, that's perfect. At least it gives me a sense of like, okay, these are the core components. I can go dig into them a little bit more, but no, that's super helpful. I am curious, as I look at the sort of the Teleport portfolio, if you will, it's access to servers, access to Kubernetes, applications, databases. We talked a little bit about, those things require sometimes different certificates, but is there distinctly different things that you have to think about from accessing Kubernetes, which is sort of a platform or a cluster versus a database? Or is it really just understanding the granularity of what those things are, what users have to do, those types of things? Like, how do I think about, access for each of those different things?
It's really important questions because people sometimes ask is Teleport like a common denominator across all of these different things? And the answer is no. Teleport works with these things natively. So if you're using Kubernetes, you should be familiar with Kubernetes security model, right? So if you're using database, you should be familiar with what kind of permissions could be dialed into database. What Teleport does, it simply allows you to synchronize all of these things across different workloads. So we encourage Kubernetes people to think about Kubernetes security and Kubernetes vocabulary. We don't bring anything extra. And the same is true for SSH, for databases, whatever. On a technological level, the way it works is this. Like you have your groups, for example, defined in all of these different resources for role-based access control, for example. And then what you do in Teleport, you define Teleport group, and then you do the mapping. Like when a user logs in, like through Active Directory, for example, we'll do the mapping. So that's how it stitches all of these things together. But when you're designing access to a specific resource, you're still operating native vocabulary and concepts of the resource you're working with. We don't really mess with that. Okay. In other words, we try to be backwards compatible with everything.
Gotcha. Can I ask you to do one thing? Because I had a little bit of an internet glitch. You were beginning to talk about remote access to these things, and then I sort of lost you for about 30 seconds. Could you redo that, just that little section? You were just saying, hey, it's one thing to have remote access, and then it's another thing to, I think, dive into the native aspect of it.
Was it the answer to this question, or is it something from the beginning of the interview? Okay,
no,
so
just this little section here, I lost about 30 seconds of what you were just saying.
Okay. So it's a very interesting question you just asked, because people sometimes think that Teleport is a common denominator in terms of accessing all of these different resources. But in reality, no, not really. The way it works is this. If you are working with Kubernetes, you have to define your access controls using native Kubernetes capabilities. Or if you're using a database has its own kind of role-based access control. So you use that. What Teleport does, it simply allows you to synchronize all these different rules across different instances of those resources and also across different types of resources. It works like this. You go and authenticate with Active Directory or Okta or GitHub, right? From there, Teleport learns what are the groups that you have in your organization. It knows who you are. So then in Teleport, you also define Teleport group, and you get mapped into that group. So now you belong to a Teleport group. Let's say that's a interns group or engineers or contractors, whatever that is. And then you get mapped from that Teleport group to a specific native resource group, or whatever it is that those resources are using. So in a way, Teleport basically translates your membership in Okta to your membership for a specific Kubernetes cluster, specific database, and then it synchronizes these relationships in real time. So you don't have to maintain them. So this really is the value of Teleport, that on one hand, it allows you to use native security vocabulary of a resource you're configuring, but on the other hand, it synchronizes it all into a single source of truth.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, the more and more ways that you don't have to make people translate things, that you do it natively, you do sort of the heavy lifting, the hard work is so important, because it's one less thing that people have to think about configuring, one less thing they can make a mistake on, and so forth. Ev, first off, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been great, really, to get a chance to dive a little bit into not only access, but the good work that Teleport's doing. We're usually very lucky to get a chance to have access to interesting startups, interesting founders. Your team just recently took a round of funding, a really healthy round of funding. So congratulations. The market is encouraged with all the things that you're doing. If anybody wants to reach out to you, your team, experiment with the technology, get to know it, what are the best ways to engage with the team, engage with your community, and so forth?
Well, first of all, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier. The Teleport is actually an open source project. So you don't have to pay us. You could just go and download, play with it, take a look into source code. Maybe you learn a thing or two about access and security. So maybe the best way to start for you, if you're an engineer, is to find us on GitHub. You could just search Teleport GitHub in Google, and you'll find the repository. There, in that README file, you will see instructions how to download, install Teleport, play with it. You can also join a Slack channel. We also have a discussion forum over there, so there are some community resources you can find. So GitHub would be the best place. Teleport on GitHub.
That's good stuff. We'll get that link in the show notes so it's easy for everybody to find. Well, thank you again so much for the time today. Again, we love finding interesting companies, and especially founders who have sort of found their passion for the problems they're trying to solve. Ev, again, thank you again for the time today. Folks, I'm going to wrap it up with that. We want to thank you all for listening every week. We want to thank you for telling a friend. We want to thank you for helping us grow the community and giving us feedback on all the ways that you listen to podcasts. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. On behalf of Aaron and myself, I want to thank Ev and the team from Teleport for the time today, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.